right, everyone. I'm here with Tim Golden, and we just did a webinar, I think it would be last week, on compliance scorecard and managing your QBRs from a compliance standpoint. What is a VCSO? What I wanted to talk about today was, why does this matter? Why is compliance going to be a big deal for small businesses? It's only something for large businesses. So I'm going to pose that question to Tim. Tim, why does compliance matter to small businesses now?
Sure. There's ever increasing regulations that have been happening. Take, for example, the FTC safeguards, right? This past year, the safeguards have been updated and basically has expanded that to more than just car dealerships. MSPs in the past always looked at FTC as, oh, that only affects car dealers. Well, that's not entirely true anymore. FTC has expanded to lots of different businesses across our country. FTC is just one of many other things, such as cyber liability insurance, are starting to ask for a bunch of compliance-related things as well. And then there's the ever-growing marketing jargon around get a SOC 2, get an ISO 27001. But the real reality is, whether you follow or fall into a specific compliance framework, it's really good cyber hygiene to pick a framework, follow a framework, and start doing something now.
Yeah. And you want to get ahead of this curve. Like right now, I'm required to have a SOC 2 by many of my clients. And so we do that. How did we do it? Well, we had to pair up with, somebody who knew what they're doing. We had to find a CPA firm. We had to find out how we were going to accomplish this, what lines we wanted to present. And it was complicated. And I was a CISO, right? Guys, I was a security director. I did compliance for critical infrastructure. This is hard, time-consuming stuff. And so if you aren't setting yourself up as a resource, your clients are going to look for this resource and go, well, not my MSP. You won't even come to the picture. They're going to look for an officer. They're going to look for an accounting firm that actually does this stuff. And you're going to lose out on a lot of revenue, and you're going to lose control of how you manage that data and help the client understand this is what is a good practice and this is a bad practice. A lot of those CPA firms, they just care about the audit itself. They just care about checking the boxes, making sure everything's clean, so you can hand your SOC 2 report over. An IT person can walk in and say, okay, this is the proper way to do this control. Here's something that's actually going to secure you and cover your butt. And you want to be on that side so that you can actually help your clients and make revenue off of it, and everybody wins. But if you don't set yourself up as an expert today, you're not going to be seen tomorrow as somebody who can help. Right now, you're just seen as somebody who can help with computers, which what does that do with SOC 2? What does that have to do with CMMC? How are you going to help there? How does your client know to turn to you?
Yeah, you make really good points, right? We are starting to see more and more requirements coming in from our vendors, right? Coming in from our partners, as an MSP, your customer, well, they might not require you to have a SOC 2, but their customers might, right? And so, as an MSP, kind of being on the forefront of doing that work, both internally and for your customer, can help everybody be prepared for when the request actually does come in, right? So, we touched on quickly on regulations, but we didn't talk too much about your customer may be asking for these things, or your customer's customer may be asking for these things.
Yep.
And you as an MSP providing these services, you can, have a great differentiator by, having some of this knowledge and background and be a great facilitator of the work. Oh, and by the way, charge for the facilitation of that work. Right? We hear a lot of MSPs, oh, I do assessments all the time, but we don't charge for them. What? if you kind of look around the industry, and we'll just pick on HIPAA, for example, right? Well, HIPAA doesn't have a lot of teeth, but there is this requirement for doing, an annual security risk assessment, an SRA. And whether it's HIPAA or any particular framework, you as the MSP should be charging to do that assessment, right? Because it takes time, right? And time is money, right? And so, as you start to consider what is your differentiator as an MSP, well, now we're bringing in a compliance as a service offering. And you know what? You're probably already doing most of those things. In fact, we just released one of our white papers and one of our ebooks about offering compliance as a service. And while it can be hard, I bet you are probably already doing 3 or 4 or 5 of the things that a CAS or a compliance as a service offering could bring to the table.
Yes. And a lot of this is if it'll feel natural to you. When you get to understanding what we're doing with compliance is we're making sure you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint. So you're not just picking on MFA. You're not just picking on drive encryption. You're looking at this as a whole picture so that you understand what's going on. And depending on the control family you're observing or the compliance initiatives you're looking at, it's going to have a different set of rules. And so when people say, "Oh, I'll do a NIST audit for my customer," like, you obviously have never done a NIST audit. No one just does a NIST audit off the bat just on a whim, unless you really know what you're doing and you have a good breakdown that says, okay, when we do a NIST assessment, we know it's going to take 20 hours, but we're going to generate $300,000 of revenue from that, from all the projects that come up. Exactly. NIST audits are complicated, hard, and really frustrating. I know, because I did them for years. And so working with a compliance tool, you can make it a lot easier, but you still need your client to understand that we can help you with this compliance audit, but it's going to cost a lot of man hours. And be very clear and upfront about that, because these CPA firms are charging $5 or $10 for a simple audit. And that is not an exaggeration. Those are the fees I have literally paid. I have paid up to $20,000 for an audit on a small, medium business as an IT. And so what you need to know is that is money you should be earning, and you should have a say in how this is done, because you're the IT provider. Yes, you need the final audit done by a CAPA firm for a SOC 2, and you need to have some out-of-band auditing done. However, you should be that quarterback that's working to make sure that this gets done and that your client is compliant, because they're, at the end of the day, it's their butt on the line. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to lose customers or lose contracts because they did not meet appropriate criteria. And this line is going to move. I know in the electrical industry a number of years ago, they moved the bright lines down, right? They said, okay, it's not good enough for us to protect just the big utilities. We now need to make requirements of the medium-sized utilities. This has already occurred 10 years ago, people. They moved the bright lines. It happened overnight. Well, not overnight. They gave them a couple years to get their compliance going. The same thing's going to happen for small and medium business. You're going to start seeing more and more and more banks requiring SOC 2. You're going to see more and more customers requiring SOC 2, because they want to know that the person they're working with is going to be at least respectful of their data.
Exactly.
That's what's pushing this. Now, here's where you're going to be my prediction, Adam Walter's prediction, in 2 years. Compliance is going to be required for small businesses, at the very least a SOC 2 or CMMC. Is there any other control family that's really being pushed on small businesses right now?
Well, spicy moment. I disagree with CMMC, but I do believe that there are, like, SOC 2. Yeah, I don't know, dude. Like, there's a lot of marketing hype around SOC 2, and
marketing works.
Well, it does, but if you actually dig into what is actually being attested to, or the management assertion of your SOC 2 and what's in scope And what of the 5 trust principles, like, oh, we have a SOC 2, but only on the management principle, or some other, only on the privacy principle. And so, they're kind of meaningless unless you're doing a full program, unless you're doing all the domains and all the controls and you scope it appropriately. So I don't know. I'm pretty much against jumping on the SOC 2 hype. I would actually, prefer to look at things like CIS or FTC, or, if we want to talk banking, FFIC. Like, there are just so many compliance frameworks. Oh, and by the way, we haven't even touched on the privacy regulations. We've just been talking a lot here for the last few minutes about security stuff, and not necessarily, every state on the book at this point, okay, don't quote me on that, but every state has some kind of privacy rule and regulation either on the books or about to be on the books.
PII definitions are very real. You should be very aware of them.
Yeah, us as IT professionals, we spend a lot of time talking security, compliance, but we always tend to forget the privacy component. So let's just make sure we're not forgetting the privacy component, because
it's overrated.
yeah, but it's the one that actually has teeth, especially during an incident and records being released.
I used to have a scare tactic I use as a director of security. And some of you are like, oh, it's fine, we can transfer this information. I'm like, that's not encrypted. It makes me nervous. Like, well, it's just this information. It's just phone numbers and names. There's nothing really big there. And I said, okay, tell you what, I got this form over here. It's an acceptance policy, risk acceptance policy. You can go ahead and transfer the information without an encryption on it. However, when the newspapers call me and they ask me, how did this information get leaked? I'm going to directly say your name, and I'm going to hold this piece of paper in my hand. Guess who gets to be in the newspaper? Whether or not you actually violated PII standards doesn't matter. It's the public perception. And so when the customer base gets a hold of this information, or some malicious actor gets a hold of this information, it's you just violated privacy. You now gave away all this information that could be found in the phone book, but that's not the point. The point is you need to be careful with data, because if you're willing to make this concession over here, why aren't you making concessions elsewhere, right? Out of the sake of speed, out of the sake of just a little less money we have to spend on this project. And so that's where compliance comes in. And as Tim has said, we have strong feelings about which compliance families are worthwhile and which ones are not, which ones are actually doing a good job and which ones won't be. But in the end, you don't get much say about what your customer is going to require. Customers are requiring me to do SOC 2. So I do a SOC 2. Do I think it's super valuable? It gets you to think about your security stack, it gets you to think about privacy in your organization. But it's just an attestation for the most part. Whereas others have teeth to them. PCI has teeth. Bad things happen if you do not observe these regulations. So I kind of want to let people know, you may not have heard a lot of the ones that Tim is talking about. And that's important because there are a ton, and you don't know what your client is going to be required to do to maintain $1 million contract, or a $100,000 contract, or a $10,000 contract. They're going to have to make these calls and say, hey, it's going to cost me $10,000 to do a SOC 2, or I'm going to lose this $10,000 a year client. Well, now it's a wash. Well, you got to help them with that business risk analysis. Is this going to be worth it over a long period of time? If so, then I need you to help me understand, do you want to do a SOC 1 or SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2? And you may not know these things off the hand. And that's where you got to work with a compliance expert to help you understand what's going on. The CAPA firms aren't going to really help you there that much. They just care about checking the boxes and making sure that you completed everything up to spec. The IT person is going to care about, did this actually work? Did it actually mitigate a problem? Because it's a much more complex problem.
Right.
Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Well, yeah. So, so, we see this a lot. Like, I just want to check a box. I just want to do a thing and move on. I just want to get like the badge
I
of
just want to do
honor.
my job.
Right. Right. I just want to like finish the next ticket. Right. I just want to like move on. And so, but the challenge is, compliance isn't a checkbox exercise anymore. Well, it never has been, right? And building out, a compliance as a service offering isn't just like, oh, I checked a bunch of things and added 2FA and maybe threw some backup on, or had a spreadsheet list of things, right? This is an ongoing, continuous thing. For years in our federal government work, in my previous life, this concept of continuous monitoring, right? Which shouldn't be a new phrase to MSPs, right? You may have a SOC, you may have a SIM, you may have a SOAR, right? You're doing these things continuously. So the concept of continuous monitoring is probably already in your mindset.
Yep.
Well, one part of that continuous monitoring is, I'm going to throw a new word, continuous compliance monitoring, right? Change management, right? Audit logging, right? These things that, it's not just a one and done exercise, right? If you look at any framework for that matter, they have a component that's update when significant change happens, update organizational defined time frame, at least annually, right? So you just pick on policies and procedures, right? Those should be reviewed annually. I got a little anecdotal story for you. I was talking to one of our MSPs customers, kind of walking them through, the sales process and helping our MSP kind of bring that customer to close, right? And they were kind of hinging on the, I don't need to do this. We hear that a lot as an MSP. And so I pivoted real quick and I asked the customer and I said to them, so do you have an employee handbook? Yeah. Everybody signs that? Yeah. And they sign it upon hire? Yeah. Well, have you made changes to it? Well, not in the last 14 years. And I was like, wow, 14 years, you haven't updated your handbook in 14 years. That's pretty crazy. Let me ask you, since COVID, right? Are you all working working in the office? No. Everybody works from home now. And I was like, is that reflected in your employee handbook? No. Case in point, right? So even things like, they get it from the HR perspective, like, oh, we need to update our handbook. We need to have everybody review that. We need to make sure that, we're doing the things that we are actually doing and we're saying those things, right? It's just a different aspect of the business.
Yep.
It's the security, the cyber, the compliance side of the business. They understand it from the HR perspective, but not necessarily from the technology. That's where you as the MSP have a huge opportunity for a great big financial win for you, but actual defensibility for both you and your customer.
Yeah. Defensibility is a key term to use in your marketing. I would say when you're talking about compliance, if something bad happened at your client, do they understand this concept of not just due diligence, but defensibility? Can you expand a little bit upon that, Tim?
Yeah, here's the thing, right? We all understand law, right? We all understand, innocent until proven guilty.
Depends if it's a court of public opinion or an actual court.
Right. And so, conceptually, like, we want a good defense, right? So we want to be, the left of boom. We want to be defensible. We want to make sure we're proactive. And to do that, we need to do the things that, write the stuff down, show that you're doing these things. And through that, defensibility, through that process of having the documentation, having the training, having the controls met ongoing, that continuous compliance monitoring. When boom happens and you're sitting in front of your, I don't know, insurance company, or we could even say CrowdStrike or any of those other things that have happened in the past 3 to 5 years, you can then refer back to, listen, these are the things that we've done. Here's the due care, the due diligence. Here's our defensible things that we can say. Yeah, we did these 6 things. We probably didn't do those others, but these are we tried. We made an effort. We took a step forward. Work with us. We're not 100% all the time, but we are making progress.
Yeah.
And by having continuous compliance, we can show that and prove that we're doing our due care, our due diligence, and we're taking steps to protecting data and risk.
Yeah, and I think just showing that you care, like that's a sock type 1, right? Showing that you've actually looked at this and checked, do I actually care about this? And then sock type 2 is like, am I actually doing it? I like that methodology a bit because it gets people like, okay, at least I'm aware. And then step 2 is, okay, at least I can prove to you as a customer that I'm doing these things. But what else is there? So when you do have an event, you can say, look, we tried. They just got around things. It happens. Like bad stuff happens. CrowdStrike releases a bad update. It happens. And we did our best. And now we get a little bit more empathy especially from the insurance companies who you need that empathy from.
Right.
So the question here is, how do you as an MSP, with this complex world of compliance and all the things you're doing, you're already stretched to your limit. How do you get to that level where you can offer compliance initiatives to your clients? And the answer is compliance as a service. This is a kick-ass thing that's coming out now. And we've got some very mature companies that have built some amazing products. So compliance scorecard, Tim Golden over here, in part 2 is going to talk through what does compliance as a service mean for an MSP? How much revenue can you actually generate using compliance as an addition to your stack? And it also helps you, how do you make your clients stickier using that? So we're going to have part 2 coming out next week, where we're going to talk about that. Thank you, Tim, for coming in and explaining to us more about what is compliance. Why is it going to matter? There's these bright lines being moved down to the small businesses where they will have to be compliant on something in order to do business. So let's talk about this all next week, Tim.
Awesome. Hey, as always, Adam, thanks so much for having us here. We at Compliance Scorecard, we want to help those MSPs have the risk conversation with your customer using our scorecards. As always, Adam, thank you so much for having me. Look forward to next week's conversation.
All right. Thank you. See you next week.